time and time and time again, when are we as a country, from a societal level to a policy level, going to say enough is enough? Let's work to actually address the problem instead of reacting to tragedies that happen time and time again. You know, through the course of my involvement in officer-involved shootings, I've had the opportunity to work with prosecutors in different states and speak with individuals at the Department of Justice, speak with individuals at the White House under the Obama administration. And I've seen progress in the last year and a half, 2 years. But we've got to continue that progress. We have millions. You want to know why there's unrest in Charlotte? You want to know why people decided to take to the streets in anger? And it's not because they knew Keith or because they knew Rakia. It's because they have this pent-up frustration. They have this feeling that justice is some esoteric, magical concept that only a select few people in this country have available to them. That is what we have to work on. We've got to change that. And I'm going to take this time right now to issue a challenge to President-elect Donald Trump, because with a new regime coming in, we will see a change in the Department of Justice. We will see a change in the way that policies are shaped in this country, from the White House to Congress. Sir, please work with us. Work with individuals like myself, co-counsel. Work with individuals like Attorney Chris Stewart out of Atlanta. Those of us who are on the front lines fighting not just for families, but fighting for change in America. Work with the families of those lost who are just as innocent as anyone else who's not directly involved in the situation. I believe, and I will remain steadfast in this idea that officer-involved shootings don't have to happen. So at this time, we'll take any questions that you all may have.
Very early on, there were competing narratives between the family and the police, a competing set of facts, really, about whether or not there was a gun present. We saw what the district attorney laid out in detail from the police side. Mm-hmm. Knowing what he said, knowing what was said at the
I will lead by saying that those who were there and saw what they saw remain steadfast in the facts as they remember seeing them. Miss Scott was not aware of her husband having a gun. She didn't see one that day. We all remember the Facebook video that the daughter put up, and she said that Mr. Scott had a book. Okay, we know that she was not there that day. We don't know where she got that information. At this point in time, based on the facts that we are aware of and evidence that has come to light in part through the SBI's investigation, I think it's safe to say that there was a firearm on the scene. But what is not clear, and you have heard confirmation today from the DA's press conference, is that there's no definitive proof that Keith had a firearm in his hand at the time that this occurred. There's testimony and there's statements from the officers that say that he did. Okay? But we don't just go off of witness testimony in and of itself. So yes, I think it is safe to say that yes, he did have a gun on his person during the course of this. It's a matter of where that firearm was. And at the end of the day, whether he had a firearm in his hand or not, that's not the key question in terms of determining whether or not Keith Scott should have lost his life. It's whether or not that officer should have pulled the trigger and extinguished his life based on everything as a whole that occurred during those moments.
And to listen to you talk about the lack of investigative files, for me, that's striking that you don't have the full set of files. Is that common? Can we get your reaction to not having what the DA has to make your own determination?
Well, I really think and want to applaud. No, there you go. Applaud Andrew Murray and the District Attorney's Office for making the information available that they're making available, not only to us and to the public. today. It is rare for the family to have access to investigative files, certainly before an investigation is complete. So we're always operating at a disadvantage in that they have more information than we do early on in these cases. But, I hope that one thing that's come out of this case is a new era of transparency and an earlier release of information as it's acquired.
Thank you.
Mr. Monette, what steps now lie ahead for you? You mentioned the files that have to be reviewed that you're going to get to take an extensive look at. Are there other avenues that you're going to pursue, because this one avenue for now has been shut to you?
Sure. First thing we're going to do is carefully analyze all the information that's been gathered. One thing you haven't heard from anyone so far is that our investigation showed that no departmental rules, policies, or procedures were violated. So there's parts of their investigation that did not address those issues. And that will be the focus of our investigation. Were these officers properly trained? Were they following their own departmental policies? Were the procedures that were in effect reasonable? And should they have been applied to this situation? We firmly believe this situation could have ended with everyone remaining alive.
And what about civil action? Is that possible in the...
Sure, certainly a civil action is still possible, and if the facts warrant it, we fully intend to pursue one.
And when you talk about training, I know the DA said that Scott was like in a trance as the effects of the medicine that he was on. Do you think that more training needs to take place when people under, medication and things like that? Is that the type of training you're talking about?
Clearly. We live in a state that has a large veteran population. We have thousands of people in our state, if not tens of thousands, who have traumatic brain injuries just like Keith Scott. Those individuals take medications that affect their ability to process information quickly, to make quick judgments, and to react in a timely fashion. So yes, we think they need additional training, that when someone at the scene says he has a TBI, they need to know what that means. That means that they need to step back, de-escalate, reduce the amount of information that is being directed at the person. Instead of having 5 officers yell at Keith at one time, one officer takes the lead and clearly, calmly gives commands because of the attention issues that people with brain injuries have. So we certainly believe there's room for improvement.
When did you and the family find out that the DA would not press charges?
This morning.
You just found out this morning?
Yes, right.
Does Ms. Scott or any family members have anything they would like to say to the community?
Anything you'd like to say? This is a really difficult time for her. And from my conversations with her earlier, I know that she, once again, would like to express the family's appreciation for all the love that they've been shown and the support that the community has shown to her and the family. It's a terrible tragedy for everyone. And it has brought some issues to the forefront of Charlotte that perhaps didn't get the attention that they deserved in the past. And she's happy that at least it looks like some good things are going to come out of this, and that the City Council is preparing to address some of these social issues that have led to these types of situations developing.
I know you would have wanted a different outcome, but I guess the DA said that 15 prosecutors looked at the evidence and it was a unanimous decision. Do you think that one of those 15 missed something or didn't see something that you...
I'll give you a chance. One thing I'd like to remind people is that in Jonathan Farrell's case, the entire chain of command at the CMPD looked at the facts and decided that shooting was not justified. And yet we ended up with a result that certainly didn't agree with their analysis. So ultimately it's going to be up to a jury and the citizens of this community to decide what's right and what's wrong, and whether this killing was in fact lawful and justified.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to piggyback off that, one thing that you have to keep in mind is the lens through which investigators, such as in the DA's office, look at these situations, and then you have the civil realm, and there are two completely different lenses. In these situations where an officer takes the life of a citizen, I don't think it's appropriate to coin it like you absolutely must have or want some type of criminal indictment. There are people who feel that way. But what we have said from the beginning is we want facts. And part of the problem, part of the unrest that you saw here was because very little information was being put out to the public, to the family. Based on the facts as discussed by the DA, I can understand their decision not to pursue charges. But that does not mean that this officer's killing of Keith Scott was right. All that means is that under the view of the DA's office, it wasn't criminal. And those are two completely different things.
Mr. Bamberg, the critique of the police and of the mayor is that they sort of stumbled through their investigation. They evolved through it in real time in front of the cameras. Mm-hmm. Do you think if perhaps they handled it differently, there would have been a different outcome? Or what's your reaction to how they handled it up to this point?
Investigating itself. They were the ones that secured the crime scene. They are the ones that have access to everything else. If you recall, the SBI didn't get involved until the family and the community asked that they be allowed to take over the investigation. I think there needs to be an independent investigation of every officer-involved shooting. It removes the concern from the public in terms of can police themselves and police their own. I think that things will go a lot differently should that become not just common practice, but state law. And that is the key, because we know that there are departments here in North Carolina that do not investigate their own shootings in the beginning. CMPD is one that always does until they are made to do otherwise. But I think that these things are learning lessons for everybody. Family, of course, the public, of course, and even elected officials. But to the elected officials and those tasked with being the leaders during trying times like this, you have to be willing, and I say this as an elected official myself in South Carolina, you have to be willing to put self aside and stand up for the greater good, which means you have to make decisions that are difficult. And you have to make decisions that may not be politically safe. And be willing to take those risks and make calls that are difficult and could jeopardize your political career. And I relate that to South Carolina when we were going through the whole Confederate flag debate. It was very risky for many of the elected officials in our state to take the stance they did, but they put self aside. And what you see is a greater good come out at the end of the day.
Focusing back on the investigation, the officers, you saw the video that they showed today and the video that was out there from a month and a half ago. How much does it matter to you that Mr. Scott was never seen raising his hand in the video?
That is a very, very big thing. Again, we look back to...
Law enforcement analysts will still say there was an interpretation of an obvious threat, and that's what this comes down to, right? So
but you have to remember the standards of the department are aggravated active aggression, which they define as the discharge of a firearm, not the possession of a firearm. So we have to look at whether an objectively reasonable officer would determine that merely being in possession of a handgun in some way is such an imminent threat that it justifies pulling the trigger. And I think what you're doing with the gun is an important factor in making that determination.
And since there's no proof that the gun was put in an aggressive position, do you feel like the police overreacted?
Well, at this point, there's no proof he even had a gun in his hand. And so,
And this is an open carry state. And so therefore, how do you jump from an open carry state to now there's imminent danger, aggravated imminent danger, and therefore deadly force should be used?
Mr. Burnett, a few years ago, as you said, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police, their command staff unanimously believed that a crime had occurred in the killing of Jonathan Farrell, yet a jury didn't agree. How did that deadlock jury affect the handling of this case? Is there any? Did the Carrick Farrell case influence the handling of this case, in your opinion?
I mean, I think you have to consider that what happened in Jonathan Farrell's case made the police department, or will make the police department, more cautious in deciding to charge an officer. They felt like they did the right thing in that case. They charged an officer for the first time in 30 years, and they received tremendous criticism from within their own department for doing that. And in the end, they weren't supported by the jury's verdict. So I'm certain that that has impacted how they view these situations going forward.
Including, you would include that prosecutors too under that?
How can you ignore it? I mean,
I know you all said that Ms. Scott does not want to speak, but just speaking as human beings, going back to a family that they're never going to have their father, they're never going to have their husband again. How do you go to Makia, and what do you say to the family after something like this? Because this has to be difficult for not just the family, but for you guys as representatives of this company.
One of the things that we do is we have to explain to the family the process. We've already spoken to them about the criminal process and the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. We've also spoken to them about the civil process, more likely than not, or true. And so we have to explain to them the process, and it's bifurcated. The criminal actions have nothing to do with civil liability. And so even though it's difficult in terms of them missing their loved one, that they have to allow the process to unfold. And we know in litigation and in court systems, there for them. And so it's a day-by-day situation of which this family is having to metamorphosize and learn to live. And so as they do that, they also have to take the information that's being gradually released to them and process that in the absence of their father, husband, and loved one. And so it's just going to be a daily situation through the grieving process, through the coping process, and then final, the mental process that Keith Lamont Scott is gone and he won't be back.
Do family members accept the decision by the district attorney not to pursue criminal charges?
What they do is they accept the process. We don't believe that the entire investigation is over because we're still conducting ours. And so they accept it as a step in the process. Ultimately, the facts remain to be seen, and we're constantly in an investigative mode.
Any comments about because of the shooting that now the city is tackling affordable housing, tackling job equity and the judicial system, all because of this? Any comment about that?
Sure. I mean, we hope that what happened to Keith does lead to positive change in the community. We hate that it took this kind of catalyst to get the city looking in that direction, because I think we've known there have been problems for years in trying to build affordable housing. Everybody says, not in my backyard. We've known for a long time that Charlotte is at the bottom when it comes to financial and social mobility for people that are born into poverty. And the fact that this case has brought some of that forward is one of the few positive things that has come out of it to this point.
Do you believe Officer Benson
has
should be
noted
allowed to remain on the force?
in some of the reports, including Ms. Scott's. What do you make of that?
Pardon me?
The DA has noted some inconsistencies in the reports, including Ms. Scott's.
There's always inconsistencies in any legal proceeding. I can promise you, when you look carefully at the statements made by the Charlotte Police Department, if you go back and look at the initial statements made by Chief Putney, where he says that Keith was given instructions not to exit the vehicle, I haven't seen any support for that statement. So there are going to be inconsistencies on both sides of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Let me